Well, that's concerning our series that starts next week called At the Movies. I'll talk about that more in just a moment. Right now, I want to welcome those who are joining us from the West Side, the West Lafayette campus. They have been averaging over their first 6 weeks, averaging 85 people over there. So things are coming along. Yeah, that's awesome news. And we're glad to have the West Lafayette campus with us. Also, I want to welcome those who are joining us online. I want to encourage you, if you live in this area and within driving distance of one of our campuses, please join us. We'd love to see you here in person. I want you to know as we get started today that next week is the first week of the month. We do a lot of special things in the first week of the month. First week of the month, of course, we celebrate communion together. But beyond that, the first week of the month, we have baptism. And so if you've not taken that step of being baptized since you came to faith in Jesus Christ, I just want to encourage you, take it next week. Come ready to be baptized. We have everything in place for you. We've got a change of clothes and stuff to do your hair, everything you need to be baptized. Go ahead and come ready to take that step if you haven't. And then also, that happens after each of our services. Also, we have the growth track is starting again next week. Now, here in Lafayette, it begins at 11. In West Lafayette, it starts after their service. But I just want to encourage you, the growth track is a system we have for helping you to discover some things about yourself. It's the way you become a member here at River City Church. It's the way that you can also learn about ways to get involved in ministry here at River City Church. And so I just want to encourage you, if you've not taken that step, go ahead and take that step. It'll last for 4 weeks, happens every single month, but start next week. If you're not taking the growth track, step, go ahead and take it. A couple hundred of us now have at least taken some of it. So go ahead and take that step. We look forward to seeing you, seeing what happens in your life after you take it. Well, today I want to focus again, like I did last week here at the start, on something I asked you to do last week, and that was the Wreck the Roof challenge. In fact, there's a card in your bulletin again related to Wreck the Roof. Looks just like this. And the Wreck the Roof challenge is related to this story about Jesus, where there was a paralyzed man and his 4 friends wanted to get him to Jesus. Jesus was teaching in a house. It was filled with people. And in order to get their friend to Jesus, they wrecked the roof. They tore a hole in it and they lowered their friend through the hole. Jesus healed their friend. It was great. The point is, they were so desperate to get get their friend to Jesus. They were willing to do whatever they needed to get their friend to Jesus. And I want to encourage River City Church to do the same thing, especially in November. This is a time for you to bring someone with you who's unchurched. And in order the Wreck the Roof campaign just basically had 3 steps. The first is to identify 3 people in your life who are within driving distance of one of our campuses, who are lost. They don't know Jesus. Maybe they're disconnected from him. After you've identified them, start interceding for them. Pray for them for these every single day until they come with you, basically. Start praying for them. And then third is to invite them. Invite them to church. Invite them to church in the next few weeks here as we're going into At the Movies. And I'll explain why that is a strategic step for us to take. But this is what I was talking to you about last week. I just want to remind you of that. We're going to come back to that card in just a few moments. But one thing that occurs to me is that when you think about sharing the gospel with people, like the ordinary people you go to work or school or the store with, or whatever the case is, when you think about the people in your life that you need to share the gospel with, I imagine that as important as the gospel is, that's the good news that Jesus came to save people from their sins and death by dying on the cross and coming back from the dead, and that everyone who believes in him can benefit in those ways. Their sins can be forgiven. They can live forever. That's the gospel. When you think about sharing that with people, I imagine when you think about people in your life who are lost, it's kind of intimidating. And the reason why it's kind of intimidating is because you don't know where to begin in talking to the people who are lost in your life about Jesus in a way that makes sense. And in Acts chapter 17, we come across a story that's about Paul, one of the early followers of Jesus, who was a great preacher of the gospel. And it's a story about how he shared the gospel with people in Athens, about what happened when he preached in Athens. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want us to just look at this passage and glean what we can from it. We start in verse 16 of Acts 17. It says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Among historians and archaeologists, they say that as many as 30,000 gods and goddesses were worshipped in Athens. So everywhere you look, there's some kind of monument to a different god or goddess. And it says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day with those who happened to be there. This is important to note, right? He isn't just talking to people in a religious setting, but he's bringing the gospel into the marketplace to talk to whoever was there. What else is interesting is he wasn't just talking to people in the marketplace and in the synagogue, but he began to share the gospel with people who were also like sophisticated intellectuals. Athens in the ancient world, it's the center of philosophical inquiry. And in fact, all kinds of art and beauty and other kinds of artistic expression come out of Athens, as well as all kinds of philosophy. And it mentions that those people were hearing what it is that Paul had to say. It says a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him, and some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Now, you may not know it, but one of the great intellectuals of the first century is Paul. He's undoubtedly, his ideas, along with the ideas of Jesus, have been the most influential from the first century. Most of us probably don't know what other people said or thought in the first century, but certainly most of us, even if we couldn't know that it was Paul who said it, we've heard his ideas somehow. We've heard his words somehow. And they're saying, what is this babbler trying to say? In other words, he's saying something, but it's just so weird I can't put it together. And others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Do you know, in Paul's day, the people that he was talking to, they didn't know the stories of the Old Testament. They didn't know about Noah and Moses and all the rest of it. And so when he starts talking about Jesus as the Messiah and the one who's been resurrected from the dead, it just seems like craziness to them. It seems like something they've never heard. And it says this, then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus. Areopagus is also known as Mars Hill in some translations. The Areopagus is a place on the edge of Athens where people met to discuss all kinds of new ideas. So philosophy was debated there, ideas about the law, ideas about metaphysics, all kinds of things were debated at the Areopagus. And Paul is brought to the Areopagus. So all of the bright stars in Athens at that time in terms of intellectual inquiry, they're standing there, they're listening to what Paul has to say as they've listened to what all the other bright people in that day and time would have had to say. It says, they took him there, and where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting. You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears. And again, they can't quite get it, what he's saying. And we would like to know what they mean. And all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. And Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that you are very religious. I see that you're very religious. I walked around and carefully looked at your objects of worship. I want you to notice, Paul has taken time to understand the culture that he's living in. He's taken time to understand these people, even though they're very different than he is. And he's saying, hey, you're very religious. I see all over the place. You've got all these gods. He says, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. And so you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. What does Paul do here? Even though these people can't understand him, he builds a bridge to them. He finds a way to connect with them on their terms. There's just a few things I want us to consider today as I talk to you about how it is to share the gospel in a culture that doesn't understand it or doesn't even know where to begin to grasp it. First thing I want you to see from Paul and to apply to your own life is this, that regardless of the offensiveness of the culture, believers must reach out in relevant ways. You know, there are things about American culture that are offensive to me. The coarseness and the rudeness of our culture. The vulgarity of our culture. It's something that rubs me wrong. It's something I don't like. But I need to seek to understand where people are coming from. And regardless of how offensive I find the world around me, I can't ever just turn inward and just be concerned with my Christian faith and my Christian friends. I've got to be reaching out and looking out. That's what Paul did here. That's what we need to do. Another observation that I have here, you know, Paul, he didn't just talk to people in a religious setting in the synagogue. He went, as I mentioned, to the marketplace, and then eventually he went to this Areopagus, this place of debate, to talk about his faith. And I want you to recognize this, that no boundary will remain uncrossed by the good news. You know, I don't know where it is that you work or you go to school or where you spend most of your time, but the people that you are with, you have an obligation as a Christian to at some point share what Jesus has done in your life. You have an obligation at some point to invite them to come and to experience him. That's part of the deal. And in Paul's life, wherever he went, whether he was in the marketplace or he was in the synagogue or he was walking down the road or he's in this public arena of Athens talking about Jesus, wherever he went, the good news was crossing every boundary that he crossed. And I want to encourage you to think about your life in the same way. Maybe you have rules in your workplace that says you can't talk about your faith. Maybe there are rules in the place you go to school about sharing your faith. I just want you to know, if you're a Christian, you're supposed to take the good news across every boundary. Every relationship in your life needs to be impacted by the good news, because you and I, once we come to Jesus, all of us belongs to him. All the places we go, all the conversations that we have, all the ways that we spend our time, they all get impacted by Jesus. I want you to notice something else in this story, and that is that sometimes people lack a framework for understanding the message of Christianity. That's what we see in the story, right? These people that Paul was interacting with, they couldn't quite grasp what he was even talking about. They couldn't quite grasp the good news of the gospel. They couldn't quite tell what was so important about it, although Paul must have been saying things in such a way that they recognized it was important. And you know, I'd say that we live in a culture where many people lack the framework for understanding the gospel. You hear what I'm saying? There are people in your life and in my life, almost no matter what we said about Jesus, they couldn't quite grasp it. I put a tool in your bulletin. It's called the Ingalls scale. And it looks like this. It's there in your bulletin. And the idea behind the Ingalls scale is developed by James F. Ingalls somewhere in Europe. And the idea here is this scale represents the journey that people take from not believing to becoming a fully devoted follower of Jesus. And so, for some people, they have no God framework. They don't even think about the world, or they're not aware of God. Other people, they have an experience of emptiness maybe, but it doesn't go much further beyond that. Some people are outright hostile to Christianity and the message of Jesus. Some people, maybe they have actually positive attitudes toward the gospel, but they don't really believe in Jesus. They haven't really taken the step across the line into saving faith. And then we move all the way down to the starting point for the Christian faith is repentance and faith. I'm going to change the direction of my life, and I'm going to put my faith in Jesus to save me and to give me eternal life. And then a person takes many steps ahead before they become a fully devoted follower of Jesus. It's a journey. And what I'm wanting you to do with that scale that I put in your bulletin is, I asked you last week, I'll ask you to do it again if you haven't. I'm asking you to write down the names of 3 people who are lost, who are within driving distance of one of our campuses. I'm asking you to write down their names, to pray for them every day, and then to invite them to church. And what I want you to do with this scale is I want you to think about where those 3 names fit into the scale. Are they people who have an experience of Christian love? Do they have a vague awareness of Christianity? Think about where they are on the scale here, because you need to recognize not everybody's going to jump from -9 to +3 in a Sunday. People, in fact, are going to take a journey step by step toward Jesus. And you and I, our role in that is to be kind of like their guide, showing them the way. And I'm wanting you to use this to recognize some people don't have the framework to understand the gospel. Years ago, Billy Graham could go into a city in the United States. He could pack out a baseball stadium with people, tens of thousands of people, give a simple but powerful presentation of the gospel, and then invite people at the end of the service to come to the front to receive Jesus. You'd see thousands of people coming out of the stands to put their faith in Jesus. And you think, well, where's Billy Graham today? I mean, he died this last year, but where is he today? Where is our Billy Graham for now? The reason why Billy Graham could do what he did is partly because much of America had an understanding of what the Bible was about. Right now in America, we're at a low point in terms of biblical literacy. People don't know, people don't understand. So the idea that someone's going to come along and be able to reach thousands of people at once with a simple presentation of the gospel is much more difficult. I guess I could say it like this. Maybe you're the next Billy Graham, in the sense that you've got to take the people who are in your life along the journey on the Ingalls scale, from not understanding to believing and living for Jesus. So you might think, well, how many people are there who don't really have a framework for understanding the gospel in our culture? Maybe you think, it can't be. I mean, maybe there are some people like that. Maybe you're thinking it's, a couple of percentage points of people like that. It's not. There was a study done recently by George Barna. George Barna does studies about all kinds of religious attitude in North America. And he identified that the second largest category of people when it comes to religious belief in America, second largest group, the only bigger group are the Roman Catholics. And this group of people I'm going to tell you about, they are actually larger than all the Protestants put together in America. And they're people who describe themselves as nun. They're the nuns. Not like nun like a lady with a black dress and hat on, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. That's the second largest group when it comes to religious affiliation in America, are people who have no religious affiliation. They believe in nothing in particular, but they're open to spirituality. Nuns believe in reincarnation and astrology, and 58% of them say they have a deep connection with the earth and nature. Now, to many of the nuns, if they come into our church and they listen to the gospel, it might sound to them like the teacher on Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. You watch the cartoon, that's how the teacher sounds. I'm sorry if you're a teacher, my apologies to you. But that's how, when people don't have a framework to embrace the gospel, it's hard for them to understand. And in this very offensive culture that Paul was in, where he was surrounded by all kinds of false gods, he took the time to investigate their culture, to understand it, and to find the bridge to them, which was the altar of the unknown God. And then he sought to speak to them in a language they can understand. Hey, this is the point I want you to take away from this. It's this. We should use the language of our culture to communicate the most important message of all time. We need to figure out what language our culture is speaking in order to speak to them. And that's why we're doing the At the Movies series. Why? Because the language of our culture, like it or not, is media of all kinds. Media, movies, music, TV, social media, technology, computer gaming, online videos. That's the language of people today. The average American spends 8 hours a day consuming media. The average American child, teenagers, consume more than 9 hours per day of media. What's the first question kids ask you when they come to your house? They want to know the Wi-Fi password. Yeah. By the time a child reaches 17, he will have consumed 60,000 hours of media. That's nearly 6 times more than the average child spends in school. It's 30 times more than the child will spend with their parents. That's 75 times more hours spent in media than the child will spend in church. Last year, $1.2 billion were bought of movie tickets in America. That's about 4 tickets per person. And it's not just the common language of the United States, it's a common language of the world. Worldwide, $44 billion were spent on movie tickets. And if you travel nearly anywhere in the world, you'll see ads for the same movies that are playing right here in our community. And that's why we're doing the At the Movies series. It's a language everyone understands. And this is why I'm encouraging you to invite someone with you in the next 3 weeks. We are showing, we're looking at a number of different movies. We're not showing the movies, but we're looking at a number of these different movies. We'll be showing some clips from them. And the first week we'll deal with the movie called Saving Mr. Banks. It's a great movie, but it's got all kinds of connections to the gospel. But it's about actually the lady who wrote Mary Poppins. The next week is about Captain Phillips. It's a great kind of military hero action kind of movie. And on the last week, we'll look at The Greatest Showman. Some of you loved it. Some of you were like, why do they keep singing? But the point is, we're going to be speaking language that everybody can understand and you can bring someone who can understand the gospel better, who can take a step toward Christ and maybe find salvation for themselves. By the way, when you saw the trailer at the beginning of the guy with the card, those cards are available on your way out today. You can pick them up, take as many as you possibly can give away. But also, you may see online that trailer we showed this morning with the guy with the card in the movie scene. You may see it quite a bit on Facebook or elsewhere. I want to encourage you to share it. We're hoping that over the course of this series, we're gonna share and invite about 30 to 40,000 people. Okay, that's what we think we can reasonably get done in this time frame. You'll help us. If you have an online presence and you see that, you like it, you comment on it, you share it, that will help us to reach even more people. I just want to encourage you, take that step with us. We're trying to reach out to people in a language that they can easily understand. And so Paul does this. He shares the gospel in language that these people can understand after he connects his God to the unknown God. And this is what he says in verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord, is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far away from any of us. And then Paul starts to quote poets, secular poets, that these people he's talking to would know their words. He says, for in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. And when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, well, I'm going to stop right there. I want you to recognize Paul, in talking to his crowd in the language they can understand, Paul, in pulling on cultural references that made sense to the people who were listening to him, he never watered down the gospel. He told them, in essence, you know what? You've been made by God. God has determined the course of history. God's going to judge every person who's ever lived by the person of Jesus. And if you want to pass the test, you need to repent. You need to put your faith in Jesus. That's the gospel. But he had to set it up in language people could understand. And you know what? People today in our culture, they need the same treatment with the gospel. And what's the outcome to his message? They heard the resurrection of the dead. Some of them sneered. And that's the way some people will respond, right? There's some people, they're just never going to believe it. But everybody deserves to hear it. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. I don't know where they were on the angle scale, but it sounded like they need Paul's help to take some more steps toward Christ. It wasn't just going to happen overnight. And then it says that Paul left the council, and some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Some of them believed. That's amazing to me. You know why? Because here Paul is in Athens. And he's preaching really the first sermon Athens has ever heard. And you know what? He gets up and he leaves. Some people who listened to him believed. And you know what? There's a church in Athens 2,000 years later. It's still there. There's a church because Paul preached a sermon in language that people could understand. And what I'm saying to you is, you have this unique opportunity to reach out to people in your life, to pray for them, and then invite them to experience Jesus. I'm encouraging you today, take that step. Listen, we can't control the response, but we can identify, intercede, and invite. It can't control for you what your coworker is going to say if they come to church with you. But you can still invite them. You know, 11 years ago, in Christianity Today magazine, there was an article written by a man named Tom Rainer. Tom is one of the great scholars about religious attitudes in America. He did a study of North America of unchurched, non-Christian people. Pretty extensive. And this is what he said after he studied the group that he did. He said, and you just listen carefully, 96% of the unchurched, non-Christian are at least somewhat likely to attend church if they are invited. Did you hear what I said? I just want to pause right there. 96%. That means more than 9 in 10 people who are non-Christians and who are unchurched are somewhat likely, at least, to come with you if you ask them to come to church. And you might think that's impossible. He obviously wasn't talking to my friends. He wasn't talking to the people that I go to lunch with or that I work with. There's no way 96% of those people would come to church with me. What if he were half right? What if of the 120,000 unchurched, lost people we talked about last week here in our county, what if half of them, 60,000 people, would say yes? Well, I would imagine it might change the way that you think about the other people in your life who are lost. It might change your willingness to invite more people to church to experience Jesus. Now, something else that's astounding that came out of this study. He said 21% of church-going people, 21% invite someone to church over the course of a year. So it's about 1 in 5 of us invite someone to church over the course of the year. But this is what blows my mind. But only 2% of those church-going people who invited people were inviting unchurched, non-Christian people. In other words, they were inviting like safe people to invite to church. Inviting people maybe from other churches to come to church with them. But very few people were actually engaged in inviting people who are unchurched and non-Christian. And I'm saying to you today, many people will say yes to you if you'll just invite. And many more will say yes if you'll identify them and start praying for them every day before you invite them.